back, everyone. Boy, it just doesn't seem like we got that much time left together. So into this week, we got what, 5 more weeks left in finals week. I don't know. Probably a mixture of both enthusiasm, ready for break, ready for the summer break, but also just not much time left. A lot to do between now and then. Today we've got more NetSuite to talk about, and then we're going to be going into detail about homework, doing some brief homework assignment stuff. I think the homework assignment is pretty straightforward today, so hopefully you didn't have too much trouble with that. But let's go ahead and get started on everything we're going to be doing next week. Let's just go ahead and quickly review where we're at. So remember, we're talking about the purchasing and revenue processes for these next four NetSuite assignments. So parts 4, 5, 6, 7. And we did the first part of the purchasing process, which if you open NetSuite, you probably should have a purchase order, PO 118 for Planning Partners LLC. That was the result of what we did last time. So remember, we created an item for sale, which my item for sale was I Love AIS textbooks, and hopefully everybody else's was too, because you love AIS. If you don't, hopefully you didn't say I hate AIS, but you know, it is what it is. But we created an item, and we are going to be buying that item, and then subsequently we're going to be selling that item. But today we need to go through the rest of our process. Now, there's a few things to note here. We've got steps left in the purchasing process, and this reflects back to what we learned back in chapter 5. So the first step in the purchasing process, technically the first step is to actually get a quote from the supplier. Now we're assuming that we're bypassing that step because we're just going to go to the official first step, which is going to be sending that purchase order. So we've sent a purchase order to the supplier, said we'd like to buy these items from you, and we're going to actually assume the supplier says, yes, we would like to do business with you. You've been a good client in the past. Therefore, they're going to do business with us. So if that's the case, then we need to move on to the next steps, which is going to actually be getting our product. Once we receive our product, then we're going to receive an invoice that's going to bill us for the product. Then we're subsequently going to pay that bill. And that's going to be our steps for today. Today is not going to be a lot of dynamic work. There's going to be a lot of point and clicking and a lot of checking of information. Now, just for notice, we are a week later in the process, and we have not yet received an invoice. Is this correct or is this incorrect? This is correct. We've not received goods, so we should not receive the invoice. Remember before when we talked about this process, we went through a process where I went through, what was the path? Setup, accounting preferences. Let's just go ahead and take a look because I want to reiterate that point. Accounting preferences. And when we went there, we actually had order management here. We looked at order management, and when we went to order management, we were going down to receiving. And I said, even though this box is checked, we're going to check to make sure it's not checked. Which again, seems silly. If it's not checked, why would we care about it? But that was one of those controls we have to make sure is in place. We do not want our vendors sending us invoices if they've not actually provided us the goods and services that they acknowledge for. So we are in good shape. We've not received an invoice yet. We will be receiving an invoice because we're going to be receiving our goods today. So that's where we're at. We're basically waiting on the goods. And if we did the process properly, which hopefully everybody set it up, this is kind of the date we expect to receive, because I told you all what's the expected date of the shipment. That's today, 26th of March. Well, today is the 26th of March. So let's go ahead and get started. So remember when we started last time, we were in transactions, purchases, and what we did last time is we went to enter purchase orders. Well, we've already entered the purchase orders, so let's go ahead and let's receive our orders. So not here, but let's go to receive orders, because this is where we're going to be saying we're going to be receiving our goods. Now, there's a couple of ways we can go about that. We could go transactions, purchases, purchase orders, which I can go to there. Basically, what we need to look for is when we actually go through this, we need to be able to identify where our purchase order is. So what was our purchase order number again? Does anybody remember? Yeah, 118. So we can actually find that list, which is listed right here. Alternately, if we don't find it here, if you're here in this list right here and you found PO 118, you can click receive. If you're having trouble finding it, alternately, we can go back to our purchase order that we initially created. It's in our recent records. And we can just click on the receive button from there, which I know everybody's saying, that's a lot easier. Why do we go through that rigmarole? I'm trying to show you multiple steps to go through the process. So regardless, of whether we go through the transactions list and then click on receive next to PO 118, or we just go to the purchase order and then click on receive from the purchase order itself, we're going to end up in the same place. Hopefully sooner rather than later. This is taking a lot longer than I expected it to. There we go. So you can see this receive button that's on the purchase order. You can actually just click on this and go to the same spot as well. Will take us to exactly the same spot. We're going to actually receive our goods. Now, the receiving of goods is not a particularly complex process, particularly if we can actually specify that we've already specifies what the information or the detail we're going to be receiving. So again, we got a reference number that's going to be generated for us. This is automatically generated by the system. So we just need to check this information and make sure it's all correct. This information should be set up for us. We need to make sure we're created from the purchase order 118, which is where we were directed from. Make sure our subsidiary is correct, our location is correct, our date is correct. And then down here in the items, we should have items listed here of receiving 30 I Love AIS textbooks, or whatever the item that you decided to name it was. And the receiving box should be checked right here. If you went through the other path, if you went through the transactions and clicked on the purchase orders, this receive box may not be checked. It does need to be checked right here because this is the item we want to receive. But regardless, we need to make sure this is all correct. Check against this. Real quick, if we're doing this in reality, again, we're obviously operating from a classroom environment. This is going to be a different individual from the person who ordered the books, okay, who ordered the items. The purchase order is going to be through some other party. We're now in the warehouse and receiving the goods. What is it that we're going to be checking against? We're going to be receiving the goods. We're going to have a receiving report that's going to have all these items on there. We're going to be counting the goods to make sure they match the receiving report. Are there any other documents that we could actually have as part of this process? So we could have our purchase order here, okay? Our purchase order to actually verify who is shipping the goods to us and what it is we're supposed to receive. Now, there's an interesting control that could be put in place here if we were actually in the warehouse. A lot of times, organizations do not put quantities on the purchase orders, all right? Why would an organization avoid doing that? Because you think that they want to match it, but why would they avoid doing that?
So people don't fudge the numbers, hoping that oh, hey, look, we're supposed to have 30 of these, but we only have 28. Let's say we got 30.
Yep.
So just it encourages them to put what they actually received.
Right, because we want to encourage the people in the warehouse to actually count the items that are received. They have to do it through a physical count because we want to make sure they're correct. So this is a control to make sure that if they don't know what the numbers are, they count and make sure that we get a correct number. So they're supposed to write down the number they received. Subsequently, we'll actually check in the system and make sure that's correct. Okay. So possible controls we put in place here. Let's assume that we're in the warehouse. We received a quantity of items equal to 30, so we're happy with it. All right. There's a lot more that goes into this process than us just clicking a button, but that's ultimately what we're going to be doing in the classroom is we're just going to be clicking a button. So we verified that everything is correct. We verified the quantity received is correct. We're going to click on this arrow next to this right here where it says for down arrow, and it pulls up another menu item that says save and bill. So you can actually just save and then we can go immediately to billing. But instead, let's just go ahead and move to our next step immediately. We're going to go to save and bill. So go ahead and click on that. This is basically saying, all right, we've received our goods. Now we're ready to receive our bill. And if everything goes correct, or everything goes correctly, this should take us automatically to our billing page. Now, like I said, there's going to be a lot of pointing and clicking today. There's not going to be a lot of entry because all the information that we needed to put in before has already been put in. The goal here is to make sure not that you know where to point and click, but you understand what it is we're doing in every single step of the process. So I'll be asking you kind of critical questions along each of these steps. And mine's still processing. All right, there we go. So now we're at the bill here, okay? Now we've got a few things that are interesting worth of note. So we're going to check against here. So our transaction was saved, set up our bill, got our vendor. It's going to be actually the vendor bill is going to be generated, the vendor billing number will be generated, which is generally speaking, this is something that's an internal document. This is an interesting note. It's got a reference number here. We're not going to enter anything here, but why is this blank? Why would we want to use this? We've actually got a vendor bill number listed up here, but why would we have a reference number listed also here? So the interesting thing about this is this is a system generated number, the vendor billing number. This is what NetSuite is assigning to the invoice number. Okay, this is what NetSuite is. They're saying This invoice number is what we're recognizing it as. Is that likely to be the same as what our vendor is going to send us, their document number? Probably not. So if we receive an invoice from the vendor and it's got a different document number here, then we're probably going to just enter this document number. This would be the vendor's invoice number, which could be two different numbers because this is our internally generated number. This is what the vendor would actually refer to. But we're not going to bother with that. We're just going to assume that these are going to match up because you don't want to make things confusing. So we're going through here, we're checking this, we're checking to make sure that we've actually got an account where we're going to be reporting the payable. Because keep in mind here, we have actually received the goods and services, okay? The goods and services we're supposed to be identifying. So we've got a liability that we're going to be recognizing. So there's going to be a setup. So we're going to be reporting that liability and paying it at some point in the future. Now you'll notice today's date is listed. The due date is 4/25/2025. So remember our payment terms were 110 net 30. This is saying that this is due in 30 days. We're going to pay it within 10 days. Okay. In fact, we're going to be paying it today, but this specifies the date that we're going to actually need to pay the entire amount by. So we want to make sure that's all correct. Let's go ahead and check one thing just to clarify, a couple of things to clarify. So we should have our I Love AIS textbooks or quantity 30 for 449.70. But what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to click on billing. And if you check our terms are 1% net 30, and we should have a total after discount of 445.20. So we got that 1% discount that we're going to pay if we pay within those terms. Okay, so we just want to check and make sure that that's consistent as well. Now, again, we're going to the part where we're actually having the bill received, and we're going to be generating the invoice. This is going to be a separate step from our receiving process. Even though it seems like we just went immediately into it, somebody else would be performing this task. They would be checking not only the receiving report to make sure that the amount received is consistent with the invoice amount, but also the external client documentation, which would be that receiving report, the vendor invoice, and our original purchase order. So we're matching all these documents to make sure all those correct. We're going to be talking about the nature of matching a little bit more in depth when we get to the revenue process. I've kind of reserved it for that. But I want you all to keep in mind some concepts. When I hear me talk about three-way match or four-way match, the idea being is that we want to actually look at one subsequent document and match it to an earlier document to make sure the information is consistent. This is a really important protocol to follow in every single one of these systems. But assuming that's the case, what are we going to do? We're going to click on save. So at this point, we've approved the vendor bill. We've said this invoice matches everything that we've received for we received in our warehouse. We're happy to actually make payment. We're going to make payment at some point in the future. Now, optimally speaking, what would be our protocol for this? Would we make a payment immediately? Would you just basically say, all right, the vendor bill has been approved. The invoice is going to be forwarded now to billing, and we're actually going to make payment on this? Would that happen immediately on that same day usually? So what is something that you know about the nature of money? Is money worth more now or in the future? So it's going to be worth more now, but if I can save money, if I can hold on to money right now, can I generate more value of it by holding it to the future? Yes, and even though it seems like really, really silly to hold it for 10 days, if we're talking about large amounts of money, we can actually generate at least a little bit of return on that if we hold it. So generally speaking, most organizations don't make immediate payment on bills. Even if it's due in 10 days, we wait 10 days. We're not going to do that because I'm not going to wait until 10 days from now. What would 10 days from now be anyway? That'd be Saturday. Does anybody want to come back in on a Saturday to make the payments here? Technically speaking, we probably should do that, but I'm not going to make everybody come to class on that day. So yeah, we wanted to wait 10 days. But technically speaking, we're not going to do that. We're just going to make our payment today. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make payment. Now, I will recommend that if you're going to be making payments in this system, that you do it through this process. We can actually identify it. We go to the transactions, payables, and pay single vendor. However, by going through this, if we actually go through the steps, I'm going to go show you the steps. If you actually click on this, you'll actually have to find the list. You'll have to find the vendor in the list, and then you'll have to enter all the transaction details. One thing you'll notice by clicking on that make payment button, all of the information is listed for us. Okay, so this is important to note. There are a few things that we're going to have to make note of. Again, most of this is going to be checking numbers and checking to make sure everything's correct. We want to make sure our AP account is consistent with what we had in the previous one. So remember we had a payables account, 2110 payables. This is where we're going to be removing the payable from once we make payment. We also need to check our cash account. This is where our cash is going to be drawn from to make the payment. This is actually really important, and we'll see why here in just a second. So make a note of this. This is 1020. Also, over here where it says memo, I would like you to click on to be printed. Because we're going to actually create a printout of the check. Yes.
How do you use this again?
Easiest way is to go, let's see, what's the easiest way? Easiest way is to go from the bill, then go to make payment. There is a way that you can go through transactions payable and pay single vendor. That is a lot more challenging because if we go through the transactions pay single vendor, we have to actually manually input all these details. And I'm a fan of doing less work as opposed to more work, just my nature in life. Hopefully everybody's there with me. I mean, maybe you can do something fun. If you enjoy gardening, no judgment, okay? But all right. So check number 5, we're gonna actually note this here as well. We need to note our account number. Make sure this to be printed is checked right here. That's actually important because we're gonna print out our check. Check the date, make sure the current date is listed. Everything else should auto-populate. So let's go ahead and go down here. Okay, so first of all, also check the payee is also planning partners. What we need to check down here is we need to check and make sure the item we're going to pay is be paid. Now, you will notice that there's an outstanding item for $15,000 that looks like it's almost a year old. That should not exist in a real system, okay? Keep in mind that this is a fictitious system. We should not have this outstanding. This is kind of silly to have that. They probably would be very, very unhappy that we've got a year-long bill that we've not paid yet. This should have been paid a long time ago. But these transactions are fictitious, so it's why we have that coming up. We're going to go ahead and just make sure we're paying the bill that we've created. Technically speaking, we probably should also pay this bill just because we want to continue doing business with this organization. But we're just going to pay the bill that we've got, which is $449.70. And again, the discount's going to make it for $445.20 because we're paying within 10 days. All right. So if that's the case, let's go ahead and check that. Make sure all the transaction box is correct. Please don't click on the box right here. This will make a very large check. I don't think it makes a big difference, but we're going to leave that one alone for the time being. All right. So if that's the case, let's go ahead and click on save. And now for our final step, we do not have a shortcut that we can walk through because we need to actually print out evidence of this transaction. Now, generally speaking, most of these transactions are going to occur electronically. They're just going to be via bank drafts, electronic bank drafts, or even in credit card payments in some situations, which we could do that, but we're going to go old school in this one. We're actually just going to have a physical check, and we're going to have to list that one out. So that is going to be something we need to create. So let's go ahead and go to transactions. Go down to management. And we're going to print checks and forms. So transactions, management, print checks and forms. We'll be bouncing around a lot on that one. All right. So this should take you to a lot of different items. As I said, we're going to print checks. So go ahead and click on checks. And you will notice that we have no records to show right here. So I guess we're done. No, okay. So what do we need to actually have? Keep in mind that we're printing from checks. It's specifying what account are we drawing from. And we've got 2 accounts listed. Remember, I told you that you need to remember one of these accounts, and it was going to be very important in the very near future. Which account did I say? 1020, yeah, because we're drawing from 1020 cash account. So once you actually pick that up, it's going to say, oh, all right, here's some information I've got related to that account. The first check number, which is the check number we're going to draft, is 5, which should have matched what you had in your original your make payment document. And also, we've got a couple transaction numbers that are applicable. We're going to print out the one related to transaction number 86, which is our planning partners payments right there. Do not click on both print forms. We're just going to be printing out for the first one, or sorry, the second one, excuse me. Planning Partners LLC. All right. If you've got that, go ahead and click on print and it should open up a new window. And you will notice this looks like a check, kind of. It doesn't have some of the check items. It's got dates and it's got the payee number, got some items listed and address. This is basically assuming that you would have a check printout form, you would have a printed form that you would be sending out here, so it doesn't actually have the background information. But this is fine. This is what your payment should look like. All right. So this is going to be your deliverable to Brightspace for today's assignment. However, there's obviously a caveat. What needs to be done first? Yep, print to PDF. Remember, this goes to a .nl file, which is NetSuite specific. In order to be able to submit this, you always have to submit as a PDF. So go to print, Microsoft Print to PDF, save that file, and then upload that. If you upload an NL file, you will not receive credit. You'll only receive credit if you upload the PDF file.
What if it's not showing up in 1020 or 1020?
It's all changed.
Not showing up for you.
Change your first check number. Change.
All right, looks like we got all that resolved out. We're done with the purchasing process. Next step, which is going to start next week, we're going to be moving on to the revenue process. So again, please make sure you take detailed notes in this process, because the questions I will ask you on the exam will refer back to a lot of my chatter about different considerations of the purchasing process. It's not so much important that you know where you need to click and what boxes you need to have checked and so on and so forth, but understanding what it is that we're trying to accomplish at every single step here, because this does relate back specifically to what we talked about back in the purchasing process in chapter 6, sorry. Next is chapter 5. All right. Talk about some homework. Okay. Question number 1, which of the following best describes a data visualization? So what do you think? Data visualization? I've got a graphical representation that presents information to decision makers. What do you all think? I'm happy with that answer. I should know, I have the solutions key. So yeah. Which of the following is not a basic activity for data visualization? So keep in mind, we're probably talking about elements that are representative of the AMPS model, or anything that kind of represents specific tasks that can be performed in a visualization. We're talking about understanding the data. Understanding the data could be argued that we do that both under the table view and the model view of Power BI. So that would be a step that we want to know. Then selecting the data visualization tool to develop the visualization, those will both be done under the report view. The one thing that we didn't do when we talked about this on Monday is we didn't document the business processes that generate data. Is that an important step in general? Probably, but it's not specific to visualization. Okay. All right. Question number 3. Which of the following is an important consideration in designing a data visualization? Okay. Well, let's just go through each of these and see what we got. Choosing the right chart. Everybody think that's important? Yeah. Explanatory titles, probably good. Using color and size to draw insight, key insights. That's the whole point of a visualization, is to actually make it visually distinct. And then defining chart elements clearly, probably really important. People cannot use charts if they don't know what's being presented in the charts. So we've got one of those fantastic all of the above. Did anybody just all of the above just automatically say, I'm just going to assume all of the above? Yeah. Don't assume all of the above, especially not on the exams. All right. Some questions that you will need to know for the exam, because I told you I would specifically ask you questions about this. Which of the following charts is used to show trends over time? So again, we know that these are going to be categorized according to charts, and which are going to be identifying what they're trying to present on the chart. I could ask you this one of two ways. I could say, what is this following chart supposed to depict? So I could say, this is the chart. What does it depict? Or I can show you, this is what's being depicted. What chart should you use? This one's pretty straightforward. A trend over time, that's a line chart. All right. That's the only one where they talk about trend over time. There's definitely some overlap here, but when we talk about trends over time, pretty much distinct when we talk about line charts. Number 5, which of the following is not part of common steps in using a data analysis tool? All right, let's just go through each of these. So in using a data analysis tool, we want to have data. It has it in the name, so I'm going to assume that getting data is probably going to be an important step. Setting relationships among tables. So this is going to be specific to data visualization, or is it? Can we actually have data tools that also want to have relationships between other tables? Yes, this is not just going to be exclusive to Power BI or to Tableau. We could use this in Access. We could use this in Alteryx. We could even do this in Excel if we want to be able to identify how we're going to run lookups between tables. Select the attributes for visualization. So if we're talking about a data analysis tool, a visualization tool specifically, this would be one of those items. This is going to be specific to visualization, so that's a little bit suspect, but let's keep going. Deliver the visualization to a decision maker. Is that going to be a common step in any data analysis tool? No. We don't actually have defined our who audience is, so we don't need to actually specify who we're delivering it to, so that would not be one of the items. So D could be our answer. Though I can't argue that if you said C, I can understand your point simply because it's not necessarily exclusive to data analysis, it's exclusive to visualization. All right, question number 7, my apologies. Which of the following is true about Excel tables? So everybody in this room should be pretty familiar with Excel tables by now. You've had an entire course on it. We've been working on it this semester. So let's just go ahead and go through these. Are they created from rectangular data ranges? I don't know. What does that table look like to you guys when you see it in the screen? The hyperbola. No, that's not right. That's not right. Okay, it's going to be a rectangular data range. We're good there. User can add a totals row. Can you add totals row to Excel? Yes, you can. Can you include filter buttons in the header? Yes, good old auto filter. Makes it nice. The table is automatically formatted. That is actually a true statement, although it's not necessarily formatted the way that we want it to be. Okay, so it is a true statement, but we may want to change the format. So all of these are true, so we're good. All right, which of the following is a characteristic of pivot table? Let's go ahead and ask Dr. Caden. I should bring her in as a guest speaker for this one. She loves about pivot tables. Summarize data in a range table or external data source? Yes. Include multidimensional summaries by designated row and column categories? Yes. User can change the row numbers and value fields? Yes. User can show up totals in the grand totals? Yes. Those are all true. So all these are characteristics. Which of the following is not true about pivot tables? Can you select report row variables? Yes, you can. Can you select column variables? Yes. Can you select to include grand totals? Yes. Are you required to sum the values in the pivot table? No, this is not a requirement of pivot tables. It is one of those things that we can do, but it's not required. So be very careful when you see an absolute statement, because absolutes are very rarely correct. Never use absolutes, never. Users can format the values in the pivot table. We already know that's correct. Okay. Question number 15. Which of these is not a Power BI view? So this is kind of an interesting question because you probably had 3 different possible answers. You looked at your Power BI view and said, well, I don't see a data view or a relationships view or a visualization view. What did I caution you about when we were working in Power BI? So this is a 2021 textbook. Power BI gets updated every single month, and recently they updated the names of the views. So that was something you had to be very careful of. So if you selected B, C, and D, you are technically correct because the current version of Power BI does not have any of those views. But if you wanted to be specific, the data view is now called the table view. So that view does exist, it's just by a different name. And the relationships view is now called the model view. So it's also exists, but it's a different name. We don't have a visualization view. That's never existed. It does not exist. But you can argue that reports create the visualization. So any of these could be arguments. But technically speaking, D is our answer. All right. Moving on to discussion question 1. So if Excel offers data analytics capabilities, why would anybody choose Tableau or Power BI? That is an excellent question. I am done. Let's just leave for the day, okay? Let's just leave for the day. No, so obviously speaking, Excel is a very important tool to be able to utilize. We wouldn't spend all the time that we spend in this course talking about how to use Excel if we didn't think that was prominent. It is a good general tool. It is a very good general tool. Can it do everything as effectively as all the other tools? Can it perform data analysis tasks as well as Alteryx or as something like Access? Probably not. Has anybody ever tried to run queries in an Excel tool when it has over 10,000 rows? What happens with Excel? It basically turns into an old man. It's like the Dr. Barnes of data analysis tools, okay? It gets really, really grumpy and gets really, really cranky. So it doesn't do the same analysis. Plus some of the tasks that it can run, it doesn't run nearly as effectively as other tools. And one thing that we talked about on Monday that's really important is you have to be very careful about doing analysis in Excel because it does change the underlying data. So data analysis is one argument that we want to use those, but this is actually asking about Tableau or Power BI. Does Excel have visualization capabilities? Yes, and some of them are pretty interesting. What do you guys, when we compare data visualization compared to Excel versus Power BI, what would you say is the stronger visualization tool? Power BI, okay? Power BI, it's specifically designed for visualization. So it does what Excel does, just much, much more effectively in that particular regard. Now, if I want to sort and organize or clean data, is Power BI going to be as strong a tool as Excel? Probably not, okay? There are tools that are going to be more effective than Excel in that regard, but Excel is going to be a good general tool. So again, it's asking the question of what we're trying to accomplish, and if we can use a tool that's much more effective in a certain area, then we might want to use Power BI. All right, or use that specific tool. The ultimate conclusion is that you as students and future business professionals are going to be much better off if you have a diverse array of understanding of different tools. If you're great in Excel, that's fantastic. But I think that it's important to actually have some exposure to other tools as well, to at least have a basic understanding. Now, am I going to say that you're going to walk out of here and feel like a Power BI pro? Unless you already are a Power BI pro, probably not, okay? But at least you're going to understand the capabilities that Power BI gives us to us. All right, last question for the day. Going to get out a little bit early. Let's go ahead and take a look at the table that are what you guys put together for Power BI. So you should have something that looks a little bit like this. And what was the goal of this activity? We already know that we can filter information, but one thing we didn't talk about on Monday is we could talk about how we can actually have tables that interact with one another. So this actually specified that it wanted you to have multiple different tables, and I just set it up this way. I had these two side by side, and this one kind of listed out here. If we wanted to, we could add a fourth table down here, or a fourth visualization down here. But the interesting thing is when you got to part D, it said, go ahead and click on the column headers here. And what happens when you do that? It filters based on that column. So in the pie chart, it says, okay, here's the comparative trend. And the sales trend changes for those particular items. Which honestly is kind of cool. This is something that we wouldn't have the interactive capability of in Excel because it doesn't, for most of the tools do not have immediate real-time interaction. Now, can we add additional filters to this and add them, have them be applicable to all of our visualizations? Yes. We look at the filters. We have got filters that actually filter on just a single visualization, or we got filters that actually filter on all pages or just a single page. Okay. So the pages and the tab as we have listed down here. If we wanted to create a new set of visualizations, we could create a new page, and we can create filters that actually affect every single tab that we create. So the capability here is pretty massive, pretty impressive as far as what we can actually go into the expanse of. This is a pretty easy assignment, but even though it had a very simplistic basis, it kind of showed you some of the capabilities that Power BI is capable of. At least this would be very impressive if I was going out into the real world and I wanted to present something like this. I would say, let's just take a look at the store level. I would get oohs and ahs like that, even though it was a simple assignment for us. Okay, so just being able to understand how this works, very, very potent and going to give you a lot more capabilities in the future. All right, Friday, we have more Excel, we have more AI. Please remember your AI research assignment is due next Monday, so start thinking about that if you haven't already. I'll see you all then.